Hi friends, this is Bobby again. I am at my home in New Orleans in Louisiana. I would like to introduce you to my book that I just published. I Fought the Devil and the Devil Won. It's a book about vampires and the origin of vampires. It's a book that has a lot of Transylvanian, Romanian mythology from 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. I mixed that in with some Cajun mythology from Louisiana, from the swamps. And it's a book full of plot twists. I really love plot twists. I counted 8 of them that I have in this book. It's a very unpredictable book full of surprises, so I really hope you will enjoy it. But this is a very short passage and a very gruesome passage, a very graphic one. Anyway, without further ado, let's hear it. The other 4 agreed unanimously with Carl. Theodore had gotten so feeble, so emaciated, that Benedict and Carl had to prop him up on both sides of the walk out of the hotel room. Then they gently loaded him into the van. Off they went, Benedict at the wheel, barely managing the clutch and the stick shift of the behemoth of a vehicle. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Other than Theodore, none of them could really drive stick, so Benedict anxiously listened to Theodore's whispered instructions and drove as slowly and as carefully as he could on the smooth roads leading outside of Rodna and into the tall mountains nearby. The nearly full moon was casting sinister shadows on the base of the ghostly-looking bare poplar trees on the side of the road that was curving back and forth outside the small town. In fewer than 5 minutes, the flatlands surrounded to the steep mountains, and the van's engine roared deafeningly all of a sudden, with close to the maximum revolutions per minute that any motor could possibly take, in part because of the very steep incline, but also because of Benedict's clumsiness with managing the stick shift and the damn clutch. In his nervousness, he was undershifting far beyond what was necessary. He was driving first gear most of the time. The road got steeper and steeper and more sinuous with each turn. It soon gave way to gravel, and Benedict had to slow down almost to a grinding halt, yet the van kept advancing. Another 10 minutes passed, in which they covered a relatively small distance, since they were driving so slowly, and they all heard Theodore's soft, tired voice mustering a faint, "Turn left here. I saw this in my dream." They turned off the main gravel road and onto an even narrower and bumpier road. It was yet steeper than the one they had just left. Without any protest or even the tiniest reaction from anyone in the van, in tacit consensus with the rest, Benedict silently obeyed Theodore's commands and continued driving slowly on the dirt road. A small, unofficial-looking, rotted-out wooden sign with faded paint on it lay on the side of the road and proclaimed Parcul de Distracție Apocalipsa 2 km. Amusement Park, the Apocalypse, in 2 kilometers, said Heidi simply, a little proud of her basic Romanian language skills. No one else in the van muttered another word. The entire mood in the van was somber, especially because Theodore was so sick and feeble that he had fallen asleep again in less than a minute after having given them directions at the turnoff. Why would a stupid theme park appear in his dreams as a destination that could cure him, Heidi thought. Well, we'll do anything to comfort him, though, even though it means driving into what looks like an abandoned theme park. They were all relieved to at least hear his soft snores, a signal that their friend was still alive. Barely. The large van kept rolling forward on the sad, narrow dirt road. It felt like it had been about 2 kilometers from where they had turned, when they all saw, all of a sudden, a dozen upside-down crosses on both sides of the road, all of them in flames, with dark smoke billowing from above the fire. Although this was likely an amusement park, it was still a chilling sight for everyone to see. Wait, no one remembers having seen any advertising back in Rodna about any damn amusement park, Benedict said chillingly. Dark thoughts quickly gathered in his head, but he didn't dare say anything else for a few more moments. By logical deduction, since there were no ads in the park, it means that there is no functional amusement park anywhere else in the area, he thought. If this used to be an amusement park at one point, that's exactly the right word to describe the timing of it all. Was, not is. Was and is as in past sense, as in this must be an abandoned theme park right now. If it's abandoned though, then why are these upside down crosses all burning right outside our van's windows, just a few feet away from us? I have a feeling this is no longer an amusement park. Not currently, Benedict finally said, emotionlessly, voicing his opinion to the rest of the friends in the van. I didn't see any signs for it back in the little town down in the valley. Romanians are not known for their great marketing skills, haven't you noticed? Carl offered unconvincingly. It's an amusement park, all right. just uh, that Romanians don't know how to advertise anything in this country, he continued, his voice cracking just a little bit, because he himself was unsure of his own words. The van turned sharply to the right, following the road into a blind curve. As soon as he finished uttering those few words, and the van finished making the turn, all the occupants inside the van abruptly went forward into their seats, only to be stopped by their seatbelts as Benedict slammed the brakes with all of his strength. Because he wasn't quick enough with the clutch, the van's engine also died, along with the halting of the forward motion. Since he was the driver, paying closer attention to the road than his friends had been, he saw it all just a fraction of a second before the rest of them did. Right after that turn, there must have been about 20 disfigured, mutant-looking men and women dressed in rags, blocking the road ahead of them and waving three-pronged fire torches in front of them. The mutant-looking people ahead of them, theme park actors or otherwise, started making loud, intimidating wolf-like howls, and in a matter of seconds, before anyone in the van had time to react, another group of mutant-looking creatures jumped out of the forest and onto the dirt road behind the van and started making the same bone-chilling, loud noises. The van was quickly surrounded on all sides by the flame-waving freaks. It looked and felt like an ambush. If this is part of the theme park performance, they're certainly amazing actors. Are they acting at all, though? Is this real? Several of the mutants started pushing and tilting the van from its sides to the point of it almost rolling over, while they were interspersing their grotesque howls with laughter and cheering. Then the brutes tried to force open the van's doors from the outside, but of course the occupants inside had locked them. The outsiders didn't waste a moment. They stormed the van and used the butts of their flame holders to break all the side windows. And then the one who looked like their leader screamed to the top of his lungs, "Propofol! Hai! Dole propofol, repede!" Benedict and Heidi quickly recognized the words in Romanian. It meant propofol. Come on, give him propofol, quickly. Not a split second later, after the mutants' leader yelled out those orders, and the men and women outside the van reached into their pockets in what looked like perfectly coordinated and rehearsed motion and produced large syringes with long needles, which then they swiftly managed to insert into the van's occupants' chests, arms, legs, wherever they could, before any of the victims inside could react and fight back. This is not acting. This is a full-blown attack. We were ambushed, and our blood is now being poisoned with God knows what chemical shit was in these syringes. I work with chemicals like this at the morgue, and Heidi yelled at first, but then dozed off, not being able to finish her thought. They all felt the drowsiness quickly taking over. Carla's vision became blurry within seconds, but unlike Heidi, she didn't get drowsy enough to fall asleep. Not yet. She could still see what was happening to her and to her friends. The brutes from outside unfastened her seatbelt and the others and grabbed everyone out of the van. All the commotion didn't wake Theodore from his tortured sleep. The poison they just injected into his veins probably put him into an even deeper sleep. But she noticed that Carl and Benedict were still awake, barely. She saw both of them trying to fight back, only to land their lethargic fist blows clumsily into empty air, several inches away from the brutes. She struggled to stay awake, aware that they were all being dragged into a small wooden barn a few dozen yards away from the dirt road. The mutants used thick rope to tie all of the 6 friends' hands and legs, tie them to the exposed wooden beams inside the barn about 10 feet apart from each other. Their leader entered the barn last. Shortly after they tied her, Carla finally fell asleep. Benedict and Carl were the only ones still awake, and they both heard the mutant's leader talk to his subordinates in slow, calm, cadenced words. Benedict recognized the Romanian sentences. The leader pointed to Theodore and told his cohort to untie him, but not to hurt him, because this one already looks sick enough. They dragged Theodore out of the barn, and then Benedict translated in his head what the leader said next, pointing this time to Carl. "Hit this one, get him out." Without showing any mercy, they hit drowsy Carl over his head with a large bat, which put him to sleep completely. Then they untied him and dragged him out of the barn, all filing out in military fashion, closing the door behind themselves. Benedict was the only one still awake, tied up under the dim light coming from the only light bulb in the barn, enough for him to look left and right and to be able to see his sister Jenna, his beloved girlfriend Heidi, and Carla, all on the dirt floor inside the barn, all tied up to those beams and all fast asleep, heads hanging down. He desperately tried to make noises to wake them up, but it was all in vain. He heard and felt his own voice badly cracking. His desperate gasps were so soft that he could barely hear them himself. He felt his eyelids growing heavier and heavier, and a little while later, it all went dark. Heidi was the last one to wake up. They must have injected her with the heaviest dose. No one knew how long they'd been asleep for, tied up in the windowless barn, but judging from the timid light around the edges of the front door, it must have been early morning now. They found their efforts to free themselves from those really tight bonds to be utterly futile. They could barely move their arms back and forth for a fraction of an inch, and if they continued to do that for much longer, their arms would start bleeding from the friction against the rough, straw-made rope. They could only pray and hope that their deaths wouldn't be exceedingly painful. It must have been late morning or early afternoon when they heard when they heard the noise of footsteps coming from the outside, and a few seconds later, they saw the barn's front door open, but no one walked in right away. Seconds later, Carla's heart almost exploded inside her chest when they all saw a severed human head being thrown inside the barn by someone from the outside. The head rolled within just a few steps from her before it finally stopped. When it did stop rolling, they could all see that it was Carl's head, and Carla's combination of panic, outrage, and disgust muted her speech completely. She wanted to scream, but all that came out of her mouth were just frantic gasps. And then there were tears as she felt her warm urine spreading between her black jeans and her legs. Millions of thoughts raced through her mind and fought each other, but the one that won over all the other thoughts was that she wanted to die right there, on that spot, right away. Kill me now, you bastards!" she was finally able to yell a couple minutes later. "Whoever can hear me, please, I beg of you, kill me now," she shouted at the top of her lungs. tasting the saltiness of her tears that were pouring down her cheeks like a shower. A stocky, middle-aged man with a hunched back and a deformed face walked in laughing, and then he picked up the severed head and walked out with it, closing the door behind himself without saying a single word to the prisoners. Carla's remaining friends didn't say a single word to her for some time either. What could anyone say in a situation like that? Soon they'd all die just like that, or perhaps in an even more gruesome, more painful way. Both Heidi and Benedict started to pray feverishly for a while, congested words getting on top of each other in a deluge of pleading for divine authority to save all of their souls. It was too late to pray to save their lives on this earth. They knew it instinctively, and they didn't even bother their supplication for something like that. They prayed instead for Carl's soul and for their souls, for the souls of everyone who was still alive in that rotten, God-forsaken barn. I want to die, please, universe, God, gods, Mother Earth, everyone, please kill me now, Carla said softly, interrupting her sobs. I want to die because the one I love is gone, and we'll all be gone in a few hours too. I just want to die now, please. A few more hours passed, and they heard a car's engine outside the barn. There was still daylight outside. It sounded like Theodore's van. A middle stature, middle-aged, average-dressed and average-looking, non-disfigured bald man entered the cabin and put his index finger over his mouth, motioning to the 4 prisoners to keep quiet. They did. They had nothing to gain by yelling or cussing or attempting to fight, tied up as they were. Their lives were about to be extinguished, so they all kept quiet in bitter resignation. The bald man addressed the group quietly in broken English with a thick Transylvanian Romanian accent. I giving you freedom. You go quiet. You go fast. Living in vain. After which he quickly proceeded to cut off their bonds. He placed the keys to Theodore's van in Benedict's palm and said, You go now, escaping. Go fast, he finally said as the 4 friends stormed out of the barn. The bald man had left the van's doors wide open for them to get in more easily, and they swiftly got in. Benedict turned on the ignition, and the engine started promptly. They didn't see any of the mutants anywhere, and the van took off sprightly. 3 minutes later, they were at the intersection that had the wooden faded sign for the amusement park on the side of the road, and they turned onto the wider road. 10 minutes later, the van and its occupants had put the cursed mountain behind them and were driving through the flatlands, with the little town of Rodna a few miles ahead of them. Benedict remembered that when they drove there the previous night, the gauge to the tank indicated that the tank was 3/4 empty. Their bald liberator had filled it almost to the top, so they didn't have to stop in Rodna for gas or for anything else. Without a word, in tacit understanding, they would get out of the area as quickly as they could before night fell again, and they'd only stop when they finally arrived in a larger city. They stopped for a bathroom break in the city of Bistrica an hour later, still aghast at the horrific events they had witnessed in the past 24 hours. Both Carla and Jenna had been sobbing throughout the drive there. Both their boyfriends were gone, both killed mercilessly. They all knew that Theodore must have met his end the same way as Carl, or maybe worse still, even though they didn't see his severed head rolling inside the barn like Carl's. Better that they didn't see it. It was horrific enough to see one of them end that way. I don't feel any energy anymore. Nothing related to this. I don't feel Carl's spirit anywhere. I didn't get to say goodbye, and I can't. I don't feel anything. I'm lost. I lost my magic. Carla finally muttered in Bistrica, the first words she spoke since their release, words punctuated by tense, angry pauses in between. She heard her own voice and felt that she couldn't even put the sentences together very well anymore. She was still in shock, and she knew it was obvious to the other three. She didn't care though. I can't use any of my magic to locate Carl's soul. I can't locate his killers. It's all blank. I just lost it all. I lost my magic completely. I don't feel anything. I just lost it. All of it. I can't use my magic to get justice. Well, no longer. I just don't. I will come back here to get justice. I don't care if I have to bring all the FBI to this stupid little barn in this shithole country of Romania, or all of America's police here, or the American embassy, or all of the US Army, my congressman from Louisiana, whatever, whoever. I'll bring all of them here. I'll come back. I'll get revenge for my Carl. I don't care what it takes. She finished in a big, uncontrollable sob. Her friends all hugged her because they could, because they were no longer tied up with rope inside a creepy, stupid barn. They were free to hug her now, free to move around, and free to continue living their lives. And so they should. They should go on, continue living. But Carla knew, though, that the only reason for her to still be alive was to get justice for Carl's death. She knew that if she couldn't get revenge, she'd want to die, for the one she loved was gone. She started sobbing again. My Carl is gone. Oh God, the one I loved is gone. Friends, this is one little passage in one of the 22 chapters. I hope you enjoyed it. The book is called I Fought the Devil and the Devil Won. This is the second reading that I've done from my book. I'm going to do one, maybe two more in a few days, maybe next week, I don't know. But thanks so much for watching and listening, and I hope to see you next. All right, thanks.